I thank my brother and my coach Bernard for the words which he just spoke to us. I hope what I have to say interlaces well with what he's delivered this morning, for I agree with every word that he's spoken. Paul, when he writes the 1 Corinthian epistle, which is really not the first, it's the first we have a record of, he describes a church. He shows a church that has been fractured, it's been divided. And as you read through that epistle, you get an idea of just how big a mess that congregation was in. They were associating themselves with their human leaders, we find out in chapter 1, rather than the gospel of Christ. Moral decay had become the elephant in the room in Corinth, and no one was doing anything about it, it seems. They were more defendant of the person than they were repentant. Lawsuits among believers we find in chapter 6. Sexual impurity was always in the mix in chapter 6 we find as well. Chapter 7 tells us they had questions about their obligations in marriage. Their worship practices had begun to show confusion and self-centeredness, and even the spiritual gifts which the Holy Spirit had given them were marked by competition and pride rather than the edification and love for which they were given. The lack of Christian love then revealed they had a lack of maturity, and some had even begun to doubt the very resurrection by which they were saved. The gospel that they had been saved by, Paul preached to them in chapter 15. Some of them had even begun to doubt that. Yet throughout this entire epistle, we will hear words of sharp rebuke at times of strong admonition, times whenever Paul basically tells these people, you should have known better. You should have acted better. You should have responded differently. And so I have to ask the question, why did things decay so badly in Corinth? How did they reach the point where this letter was necessary? And the only answer that I can come up with is that no one would stand up. No one would step in whenever they saw wrong beginning to grow. They had fallen into a modern trap, which we're all susceptible to, and that trap is this: being mean is worse than the sin itself. Whenever we address sin, so many people today believe we're being mean towards an individual. And in Corinth, these men had grown soft, it seems, in their stance against sin. They had confused cowardice with kindness. They had drifted away from the faith, and the entire church was paying the price. Paul tells them in chapter 16, he assures them he plans to make a visit. He plans to come and see them, but he says, I can't come right away. And so I'm going to try to send Timothy. And of course, Apollos, I tried to send him and he wouldn't come, we find out a little later in that chapter around verses 10 and 11. And it seems to me, if we read back into what Paul is saying here, is, I read what you wrote. Chapter 7 tells us concerning the things you wrote unto me. We know this is not the first correspondence between Paul and Corinth. And it makes me think maybe they wrote to Paul and said, hey, would you send somebody up here with some backbone who will handle some of these problems? Would you send somebody to us who can help us get straightened out? And Paul closes this letter, which is filled with much rebuke, as he delivers a charge in chapter 16, verses 13 and 14, when he says these words: be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, and let all that you do be done in love. The words that Paul gives here sounds much like a military order. It's direct and it's uncompromising. Be watchful minds us that soldiers oftentimes neglect their own personal comfort and sometimes their own safety in order to keep watch over everyone else that needs to rest and be prepared for battle. We know that negligence is an open door through which evil can walk, and sin often creeps into lives and homes and even our churches whenever we're negligent. And so we find this command repeated several times throughout Paul's epistles, and even Peter says so. In Colossians chapter 4 and verse 2, continue steadfast in prayer, being watchful with thanksgiving. 1 Thessalonians 5 and 6, Paul says, do not let us sleep as others do, but let us keep awake. Let us watch, he says. Peter says, be sober-minded, be watchful. You have an adversary, the devil, prowling about as a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So Paul tells the Corinthians, you need to learn to watch, be on guard. But secondly, he says, stand firm. I'll not belabor this point because our brother's done so well at speaking of it. But standing firm in the gospel means you know what the gospel says. You know what the faith is, and you're ready to stand upon it. You plant your feet in the truth. You stand in the truth of God's word, and you don't waver from that. When the culture around you shifts and the enemies press in, God's people are not to waver from what his word says. It is the truth. It is the very foundation upon which we stake our lives. And we need to treat it that way. We need to stand in what the book says, not so much in our own opinions, not so much in our own maneuverings and trying to make the book say what we want it to say, but stand in what the truth says. Paul told the Philippians, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. But the phrase that catches my attention out of this passage is the next one. It's the only time this Greek word is found in the New Testament, and it's rendered quit ye like men in the King James Version. The New American Standard Bible and the English Standard Version says simply, act like men. Now there was a time in our history when that meant something. There was a time in the history of this country when that meant something, but no longer does this statement carry the force that past generations felt with it. Our modern culture has worked to blur, distort, and demonize God's design for man. Masculinity is seen as being toxic. It's offensive to most people today. No one truly admires a man who's driven by his testosterone and impulses. Let's get that out of the way. I'm not talking about being a brute. I'm not talking about running roughshod over everyone. But to act like a man calls us to maturity. It calls us to understanding what men need to know and what men do. We need to learn to bear the weight of responsibility without complaining. We need to learn to lead our homes and our churches with conviction and strength. We need to refuse to cower to opposition, as our brother has spoken about. We need to neglect the so easy decision to choose our own convenience over conviction. I read a quote the other day that said, no culture will ever rise above the character of its men. That was true in Corinth, and that's true today. The biblical view of manhood has been diluted in today's world, and it's infiltrated the church. Now, it's about this time in the conversation about this that someone speaks up and says, yes, and this feminist movement, this feminism which is destroying the world. Let me tell you something, folks. Feminism rose to prominence because men failed to act like men. Feminism took a hold because there was no one else taking a hold. Back when men swung picks in coal mines and felled trees with axes, nobody was clamoring for their spot then. Nobody wanted what they were doing then. But now when success is defined in conference rooms with psychological manipulation and politics, women step in and say, I can do that too. And pretty soon they step in and then they step over. Remember what a fool Delilah made of Samson. He should have never been in the position. But she made a fool of him and his strength because she was able to step in and manipulate him. I'm reminded of what God told Adam and Eve in the garden whenever they broke the first and only command they had at the moment. He told Eve, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. That's the English Standard Version. What he means by that is y'all are not always going to see eye to eye, but I'm leaving him in charge. He's in charge of you. He's going to rule over you. But then he says to Adam, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, because you let her persuade you from what I told you to do, cursed is the ground for your sake. We've lost our manhood in today's world, even in our homes in many cases, because sometimes our husbands come home from the office too stressed out to lead, collapse into their chair to gripe, and not only does science say that their testosterone takes a hit by doing this, but his wife is left to pick up the pieces. She's got to continue to run things as if her running them all day long has not been good enough. The children run wild with no discipline. Their mother signs them up for every summer camp and every ball team that she can get them on, trying to give them some structure. Never heeding the word that God was telling Adam, I expected you to lead her, not the other way around. Women are not simply overpowering their husbands today in the home. They're stepping up where men are not. They're filling in when men are not. And men come home and claim they're too stressed to do anything with the kids. That's wrong. Men, if you're going to have a family, you need to raise them. You need to spend time with them. You need to teach them what they need to know to make it through this world and then to make it to heaven. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's a difference between being a good man and being good at being a man. We oftentimes get the two in the same conversation and we confuse them, but there's a difference. Being a good man embraces moral value. He's honest, he's fair, he's loving. The Bible says we're to love men who are good. But being good at being a man requires masculinity. It requires conviction. It requires confidence. It requires courage. Many of you know I work in a school at my secular job. Been doing it for 24 years now. Brother Todd and I were talking about this before services. How the culture has changed in the last 2 decades. Boys today can no longer carry on conversations because they're not being talked to. Not at home, not in their friend groups. They spend all their time with a little device in their hands. It's the only way they can communicate. No one will stand up for what's right. You've heard of the bullying problem we have all across our schools. I'm not denying that it exists, but let me tell you this. When we were in school 20 or 25 years ago, there were less bullies because there was more people willing to step up and defend others. More people willing to stand in the gap for those that couldn't defend themselves. You don't see that much anymore because it's been taken away. It's been feminized, and people have just succumbed to that. They allow disrespect of authority at home. They allow disrespect of authority at schools. The adults have no interjection into this conversation until you hurt their baby's feelings, and we're in a crisis in this country because we're failing to teach our young boys to be men. They're discipled today by rappers, by pro athletes, by TikTok, by pornography. That's where they're learning how to be men. And that's a shame on us if we're allowing it. It's a shame on us. How men respond to evil everywhere will determine the direction of society. And it'll especially determine the direction of the Lord's church. In 1867, John Stuart Mill wrote, "Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. Evil and injustice do not require your active participation to prevail. All it simply takes is for us to be passive and indifferent to what's going on around us, who are morally upright, and those things will prevail." I want to tell you 3 responsibilities that we cannot escape as men, as husbands, as fathers. And the first one is we bear the responsibility of providing for our families. In modern culture, this has been reduced, it's been taken away, and we often say that the woman can do just as much as the man can in terms of earning, and that may be true, and I don't necessarily think that it's wrong that a woman work outside of the home, but it does not reduce the fact that God gave the responsibility to men to provide for their families. Paul told Timothy, if any provide not for his own, and especially those of his own house, he's denied the faith, and he's worse than an infidel. I would add to this is not just the necessities of life, food, clothing, and shelter. But you need to provide for your young sons training, education, how to grow up, how to be a man, how to learn how to do some things in this world. Our work ethic is suffering because we're not teaching it anymore. Find things around the home your son can help you with and teach him how to be a man. About 3 years ago, I grabbed my son, who was 12 at the time, made him put on a pair of long pants, go to town with me, and we went into the farm store. We're there, checked out all the chainsaws, and he's trying to figure out what I'm looking for myself. And I pulled the small one down, and I handed it to him. I said, "How does that feel?" He looked at it, got wide-eyed. I said, "That's going to be yours." I carried him home. I put him in the front end loader of a tractor, and I picked him up in the tractor, and he started sawing limbs off a tree. And of course, I've taught him how to use a saw. I did that for a specific purpose, which he's only finding out right now. And that was, if you want a young man to act like a man, you got to treat him like a grown man. And so his mother's out there watching us do all of this, and she's, "Watch your legs, watch your hands, stand back, it's going to hit you." He turns around and he gives me one of these motions, which if you drive a tractor, you know that means let me down. He crawls down, climbs up on the step of the tractor and leans over and says, "You're going to have to check me out of school to do this. I can't work in these conditions." And he got it. He understood. If we want our young boys to act like men, we're going to have to start treating them like that instead of holding their hand all the way up to junior high school. But more than that, we need to teach them how to treat others. We need to teach them how to be around people. We need to teach them how to show respect to their elders, to their fellow man. And Father, there's no better training you're going to give your son than how you treat his mother. How you treat her in front of him and how you show that she is invaluable to your family dynamic. You love her and you cherish her and you do that openly in front of them so that they know that their mother is important. A functional, loving home is invaluable to bringing up our children. And the Bible says if you don't provide for your children, you've got eternal consequences. But secondly, we need to teach our children to be obedient. God expects them to obey. He expects them to obey you first in the home, and then He expects them to obey Him whenever they become old enough to understand His commandments. This means they're going to need discipline from time to time. And so many times we see mothers turn all the discipline, or fathers, turn all the discipline over to mom and step back as though that's not his role. Fathers, it's your role to set the tone for expectation and discipline in the home. I find men today who are afraid to discipline their kids, afraid of what people are going to say, afraid of how people are going to react whenever he reacts, and it's reached new heights. I saw a video just this week of a teenager punch a coach in the face in a gym, and the only people in there who could have stopped it were holding up cell phones, recording it, giving a commentary. When did this become okay? When did this become fashionable to watch on and not step in and take care of problems? Men need to set the tone. The Bible teaches us whoever spares the rod hates his son. You set him up for a lifetime of failure. But he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Again, he says, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. And again, Proverbs says, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he'll not die. And my kids will attest to that. But if you strike him with a rod, you'll save his soul from hell. Fathers, we need to teach our children obedience and respect, and it'll save them a lot of problems in life, and it'll save their soul from hell. Most importantly, we need to teach them service. Service to the church and service to God. In the parable of the sower, we find some of the seed fell on rocky places. It sprung up and withered away because it didn't have any root. Now, I would subject to you today that that soil was not worse soil, that it wasn't much different than the soil around it. It had just not been prepared the same. It had just not been tilled to the same degree. It's our job to till the soil of their young hearts. And kids are going to mimic what you say and what you do, so teach by example. It's disturbing to me when I go places and I look out across an audience and we're singing a song, perhaps the invitation song, and Dad is sitting there with his hands in his pockets and his lips shut, and his son looks up and sees that and lays his book down and follows suit. He's going to do what you do, and he's going to mimic what you do whenever you do it in church, whenever you do it at home, and so we need to set that example. I'm reminded of what God told Abraham before he was about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him, and keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he's promised. God included Abraham in his plan. He told him what he was going to do because he saw that he was going to rule his family and follow after him. The Bible tells us if one does not know how to manage his household, how will he take care of God's church? And if we don't train up our boys to act like men, we're going to hinder the leadership plan God has for the church. We're going to hinder our children when we don't teach them respect and obedience to authority. We're going to disqualify ourselves from being able to be a church leader. And we're going to leave a pitiful example for our sons to overcome. In the church, we need more men acting like men. Now I'm going to add to that what Paul says in verse 14. Let all that you do be done in love. Let all that you do be done in love. You see, watchfulness without love makes one cynical. Makes them doubtful of every intention. But whenever you love and you're watching because you're on guard, then you can watch for those who you have under your charge and care. Strength without love will make one a tyrant. Will make one want to run over folks, make him want to be a bully. Courage without love does make one a bully. And of course, when love governs everything that we do and say, we can teach our young men to act like men and therefore fulfill the law of Christ. In short, the church needs watchful men. The church needs steadfast men. The church needs courageous men, strong men, loving men. And it's time that we start teaching them to act like men.
We really appreciate you watching this channel and supporting the Chapel Grove Church of Christ YouTube page. I want to ask you a quick question. Do you want to help in a big way spread the gospel and help this channel succeed? All you have to do is click the subscribe button, click a thumbs up, and then share it with a friend. Share it on social media, share it on text. However you do it, just share it for other people to see. It helps the channel grow, it helps the videos get out there, and it helps spread the gospel in a really easy way that has a big effect. Thank you for supporting us, and come back for more videos.